Welcome, everyone. Today we have a very special guest. Please welcome Dorothy Williams.
Thank you. Is it my turn to speak?
Yes, ma'am.
How do I unmute? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes,
Can you
ma'am.
hear
We
me?
can hear you. Could you please
Oh, okay.
introduce yourself for everyone?
Okay, well, my name is Dorothy Williams. I'm here to talk about the so-called technology and businesses back when I was a kid.
Yes, so as you all may see, Dorothy has been on Earth for a very long time.
Son, if you're gonna call me old, you might as well just say it to my face.
Well, I believe you're about 15 years old in the 1920s, correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
So how how old would you be right now then?
I'm not gonna respond to that question.
So you must remember a lot of stuff that was going on back then.
What do you think I am, a phone book? I was 15 for God's sake. Yes, I did believe I remember most of it.
We'll see about that. Anyways, I know that there was a big boom in technology in the 1920s. Do you remember anything about that?
Yes, there were so many new gadgets and appliances, like these things, what you call them? It's like this, but it's like auto. Oh, right, an automobile. There were also these big flying birds. They went like through the sky. They were like, I think airplanes or planes. I think it was planes, and they were going faster than me, mom. And trust me, she was fast. Sometimes they were a bit scary, and I remember my neighbor's dog would run away every time one passed by. But we got used to it pretty soon.
In 1920, the best selling car on the road was the Ford Motor Company's Model T, which at its lowest price cost $260, which was no small price at that time. Ford had sold 17 million of these cars between 1900 and 1930, more than 2,000 car manufacturers had been in business. Smaller firms such as Packard, Nash, Hudson, Franklin, Duesenberg, and Pierce Arrow generally made higher priced, high quality automobiles. Despite, despite, despite the existence of so many companies, the public bought cars mainly from the big three: General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford. G- General Motors provided the Chevrolet, the Chrysler, and the Plymouth, and Ford provided the Model T and the Model A.
Oh, darling. Oh, darling, don't you talk about those Fords. My daddy went out and spent our savings on one, and you had no idea how mad mom was.
Now, what do you know about computers?
Well, people talked of these things, and boy, you have no idea how big of a deal they were. My daddy would not stop talking about them. Too bad they're too big to fit in our house. All we were told was that the big businessman would have them and do all their fancy work on it. Don't tell anyone, but I really wanted one myself. I always dreamt of owning one and being all fancy and successful, but my mom would beat me if I asked for one, though.
I noticed you mentioned appliances earlier. Could you talk about those?
Well, of course, there was this new thing. It was called electricity, and we had just got it in our home, and it connected to all these things like the refrigerator.
That's right. At, at the time, most households had just gotten access to basic electricity, which led to many households having electric motors, refrigerators, phonographs, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, and even refrigerators. Back then, almost all women were housewives and had the primary role of maintaining the house and watching the kids. At first, these appliances let women not spend too much time in their house, but eventually the standard of living increased, and houses soon had to be much cleaner, ironically increasing the work that women had to do.
Oh yeah, I remember me mom browsing the vacuum cleaners all day, wondering how to use them.
So now that we've talked about technology, it's time to talk business. So in the 1920s was when the 1920s was when many industries sparked. Would you like to say any words about that?
Well, I like to say my memory does go that far, but I think I know of these railroads, which especially helped in the war effort. New vehicles such as automobiles, like I said before, and trucks, even those big planes. There was also a big boom in industries like farming.
Wow, railroads were actually a very significant factor in the development of the American West. For decades, the railroad industry was treated as a virtual monopoly on transportation.
What's a virtual monopoly?
A monopoly is an entity that enjoys exclusive ownership through legal privilege. Unfortunately for railroad businesses, the federal government actually took control of the industries because it was so key to the success of the US war effort and didn't even return it back to private ownership until 1921. How crazy is that? Anyways, what other innovations started in your time and what helped build the American West to what it is today?
Well, one big thing is farming. Farming was for those oldie, boring grandpas with nothing better to do in their life. Unlike other industries, farming is dependent upon natural forces back when they didn't have any GMO.
Well, yes, farming was also considered to be very dull due to the young rural generation at the time. There was the problem of overused farmland and unpredictable weather conditions. But besides that, the citrus growers thrived, the demands for oranges and grapefruits rose, and livestock producers also thrived at the demand for the meat that had greatly increased.
Oh yes, Daddy loved me.
I know how he said that railroads got taken into the war effort. Did anything else?
Well, of course, radio broadcasting and air carriers had a big part in the war.
That's absolutely right. By the middle of the decade, there were so many commercial radio stations that a predicament arose over the frequencies at which they broadcast.
What's a predicament in a radio station?
Well, this means that stations with the strongest frequencies were attracting the most listeners, while the people were happy that they were able to receive a broadcast from long distance stations. Advertisers were very mad because someone who lived just a few miles away would listen to a radio station hundreds of miles away. To help this, President Coolidge signed a legislation to create a regulatory body within the Commerce Department that had later became the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. This department regulated the frequencies at which radio stations were allowed to operate.
That sucked. Now I can listen to my favorite news because all my favorite stations were so far away.
So we've thought about businesses. Now time to talk about one of the largest chains of dry goods stores, J.C. Penney.
Yes, J.C. Penney was my favorite place to go. My mom said she would spank me because it cost too much money, and Daddy had me spend the money on an automobile.
Haha, yes. J.C. Penney was one of the best known retail merchants of the 20th century. James Cash Penney, the owner of J.C. Penney, had many policies like cash and carry, profit sharing, and stock ownership for managers, and good quality but modestly priced goods. The stores featured clothing for the family, fabrics for the yard, sewing supplies, stockings, and even underwear. In 1929, James Cash Penney owned about 1,500 stores. How crazy is that?
Oh, no wonder there was a J.C. Penney around every corner. It was kind of like Starbucks. My friends were asking me like, "Hey, want to go to J.C. Penney?" And I would be like, "Which one? There's three."
So, as you probably know, J.C. Penney was a big business at the time, and Woodrow Wilson was taking a part in regulating big businesses. Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge emphasized a laissez faire attitude, which means that the government had less control over industries, except for railroads, public utilities, and radio broadcasting, and also air carriers. Their plan worked, and the government rarely involved itself with industry. Warren Harding also had a rule of reason. This is the idea that there was a legislation who kept businesses from illegally restraining competition. The problem was that there was no government, employment benefits, social security benefits, or other consumer protections. This led many people to poverty.
Oh, thank the Lord, I wasn't one of those. What do you call it again? Oh, right. Hobos living on the side of the street. It's called poverty. At a point, I started to feel bad for them because there was nothing back then like there's today. Like nobody ever gave money to the poor. There's no donating money to the poor or rich people casually just like dropping $100 bills like they do in those YouTube videos. It just didn't happen. And people on the side of the streets got no support at all.
Even with some business booming, your poverty also started during this time. What happened, and are there any reasons?
Oh, good Lord, yes. There was a time where the economy crashed and everyone went into depression. Good golly, this is a sad time. Me and my mom sometimes were struggling to feed the family, but we pulled through. Many people have speculated and thought that since very rich investors were making big banks through stocks, they thought that just buying any stocks would mean profit. And so many people ended up buying many stocks. Before, in the mid 1920s, only 2% of investors held shares. But as the word spread, anyone with a decent income held shares in many companies. With investors not being protected from manipulated and wrong information and people buying on margins, for example, they buy $30 off a $100 stock and take $70 as a loan. But if the stock falls $10, so people need to make up more money for the loan from nowhere, and eventually the stock market crashed and wiped many investors. Thank God we didn't invest.
So now let's put businesses aside and talk about some advertising. One of the best-selling novels that decade was The Man Nobody Knows. This book was not any normal book in that time period and completely reshaped Christianity from the viewpoints of businessmen.
My daddy actually bought that book, but he read it once, and as a true Christian, he said it was that he's ever read.
Haha, that is true. A lot of Christians thought it was a sin to be writing these books, but it did influence many businessmen. The book depicted Christ as a salesman and the world's greatest business executive. This book changed the lives of many people, while others thought it was a joke to put Jesus as a salesman.
Well, that's my daddy right there.
You know, your daddy's a lot of things. First, he spent the savings in a car, which didn't let you go to J.C. Penney. Then he's talking smack about an accredited novel.
Don't you say a word about my daddy.
Well, anyways, you mentioned a lot of new products earlier, such as the house appliances. Well, sometimes people like your dad spend their money on a car, which may not let them afford all these new products. This is why that there this that is why that there were installments. At that time, almost everyone was using installment plans. These plans let people buy products over time. For example, if something costs $10, instead of paying $10 at one time, they could pay $1 a month for 10 months. This sounds crazy, but it helped a lot of people. Well, that's it for today's show. Come back next time, Saturday night at 9.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.